In the sticky heat of July 1976, the air in Pine Creek, Alabama was thick, not just with humidity, but with old grudges and quiet hate. The kind of hate that didn't always spit in your face. It smiled at you in the morning and burned a cross in your yard at night. Pine Creek was one of those southern towns that time forgot. Dirt roads turned to mud every time it rained. The white folks lived closer to the courthouse, the black folks near the train tracks and the woods. There was one grocery store, one diner, whites only, and one small stubborn church called Mount Zion Baptist. That church was Elijah Boone's kingdom. He wasn't a regular pastor. Elisha wasn't soft-spoken or careful with words. He didn't preach for comfort. He preached with fire in his bones and thunder in his throat. At just 38, he had a voice that could shake the devil out of a man, and some said he was trying to do just that, shake the devil out of Pine Creek. The old folk loved him. The young folk admired him. But the town's white power, Sheriff Gaines, the mayor, and the men who drank bourbon behind closed doors, hated him with a quiet, coiled kind of hate. They said Elijah was stirring trouble, talking about voting, talking about land rights, preaching sermons that made white men nervous. He said things like, freedom doesn't knock, it kicks in the door, and Jesus didn't die for us to live scared. In a town like Pine Creek, that kind of talk could get you disappeared. One Sunday morning, Elijah preached the loudest sermon he ever gave. There are two kinds of justice, he said, eyes burning from the pulpit. The one man gives and the one God gives. And I promise you, God don't miss. Some said it was the way he looked directly at the sheriff's wife sitting in the third pew when he said it that set everything off. That night, Elijah didn't come home. Ruthie, his wife, sat waiting with dinner cold on the table. His car was still parked by the church. The lights inside were off, but his Bible sat open, and one of his polished shoes lay near the back door. They never found his body. Sheriff Gaines told reporters Elijah had likely left town, maybe joined a woman up north. Case closed. No search party, no dogs, nothing. Ruthie didn't believe it for a second. Neither did the church. Neither did little Gloria, their 10-year-old daughter, who started lighting a candle every night at the church steps. That candle burned for years, and time, as it always does, moved on, Mum, even when it shouldn't have. In the 1980s, Mount Zion fell into disrepair. Weeds overtook the graveyard. The steeple cracked and leaned. White kids started using the chapel for beer and dares. The Boone house was boarded up after Ruthie died in 1989. Gloria left Pine Creek before her 20th birthday and never looked back. Then, 26 years later, a man named Harold Mays found himself in those woods again. Harold wasn't the hero type. He was 58, heavy-set, with a back full of pain and a drinking problem he liked to call manageable. He ran a small logging crew and took contracts cutting trees on old unused land. That morning in March 2002, he was cursing the cold and wishing he'd stayed in bed when his chainsaw jerked mid-cut. He'd been working on an old pine stump about 10 feet wide, halfway rotted but dense in the middle. Something metallic caught the blade. "Damn rocks," he muttered, pulling the saw back and kneeling down to clear it. But what he found wasn't a rock. It was the edge of a small rusted box, and like a toolbox but older. The stump had grown around it like it had been swallowed by the earth. Roots wrapped it like fingers. He could have ignored it, could have kicked dirt over it and gone on with his day. But something about it, something about the way the wind changed when he touched it, made Harold uneasy. Like he'd just opened the first page of a dark story that didn't want to be read. He loaded it into the back of his truck and drove straight to town. The sheriff in 2002 wasn't Wilford Gaines. Gaines had died in '85 in a hunting accident no one talked about too much. The new sheriff was Reuben Bell, a young black man with a military haircut and the kind of stare that made people finish their sentences quick. When Harold slammed the box down in his office, Bell didn't flinch. "I found this buried inside. A tree near the old church," Harold said, scratching his beard. "You'll want to see what's in it." It took gloves and a crowbar to get it open. The hinges had rusted nearly shut. Inside, under a layer of dust and mold, was a Bible, thick and leather-bound. Bell picked it up and slowly opened the cover. "Holy hell," he whispered. Inside the front flap, barely readable through the faded gold script, was the name, Rev. Elijah J. Boone, and under it, folded and tied with a red string, was a photo. It was black and white. Elijah, standing in front of the pulpit, hand raised, smile calm. But what caught Belle's eye was what was written on the back in smeared ink. "They'll never let me leave this place. Pray they find me." For a long time, no one spoke. The room felt cold, like a winter wind had crept in through the cracks. Harold swallowed hard. "You think this means what I think it means?" Belle nodded slowly. "We just opened a ghost story, Harold, and I don't think it's done with us yet." By the next morning, word had already spread. Pine Creek was still a small town. No matter how many years passed or how many new folks tried to settle in from nearby counties, the old blood ran deep, and the gossip ran deeper. A photo, a Bible, a box buried inside a tree stump. It all sounded like something from a movie, but to the people who'd lived through 1976, especially the black folks, it felt like a wound being picked open with a rusty nail. Sheriff Reuben Bell didn't sleep much that night. He sat at his desk reading through the old Bible, trying to find anything more, a name, a scribbled note, a clue. He ran his fingers over the faded edges, felt the ghost of the man whose hands once gripped that book. Inside the back cover was a torn scrap of paper, brittle and yellowed. It read, "They threatened Ruthie. If anything happens, it was never just about me." Bell exhaled slow. This wasn't just a missing persons case. This was a cover-up, a silencing, and it reached far beyond the pulpit of Mount Zion. He needed more. He needed records, people. So he started digging. That same day, he made a quiet visit to the county records office, hoping to pull up the original missing persons report from '76. It wasn't there. No file, no paperwork, nothing. The clerk, an older white woman named Marla, who'd worked there forever, gave him a strange look when he asked. "Sheriff Gaines handled that one himself," she said slowly. "Said it wasn't official." "No paperwork at all?" Belle asked. She shook her head, lips pressed thin. "Some things we weren't allowed to file." Belle walked out with a stone in his gut. Meanwhile, Harold Mays sat in his truck outside the sheriff's office, holding a cup of gas station coffee with shaking hands. He hadn't told anyone what he'd found. Not his crew, not his brother, not even his wife. Something about that. Box still felt wrong, like he'd disturbed something that wanted to stay buried. He drove back to the site that afternoon, against his better judgment, alone this time. The stump was still there, cut low, the roots still half exposed. He stood in front of it and stared for a long time. Then, just out of impulse, he started looking around the ground, kicking up dead leaves and poking the dirt with a stick. That's when he found it. Not far from the stump, maybe 8 feet away, was a patch of soil that didn't look quite right. Softer, darker, sunken in just slightly. He dropped to his knees and started digging with his bare hands. It didn't take long. He hit something. Solid. Fabric. Old torn fabric wrapped around something dense. His breath caught. By the time Sheriff Bell arrived, called by a single shaky call from Harold, there was already a crowd forming. Bell ordered everyone back, roped off the area with yellow tape, and called in a forensics unit from Montgomery. It took the rest of the day and a part of the night, but eventually the thing was confirmed. Human remains, skeletonized, wrapped in an old church robe, bones broken, ribs crushed, and a gold wedding band with the initials EB still clinging to one brittle finger. The DNA confirmation would take weeks, but everyone already knew. Elijah Boone had never left town. He'd been buried under a tree, swallowed by time and silence right next to the church where he'd preached about justice. And someone had made damn sure nobody found him. The discovery lit a fire in Pine Creek. Old wounds long buried came screaming back to life. The town paper ran a front-page headline, "Pastor Boone found, truth buried for 26 years. White." Folks tried to stay quiet, but the black community began gathering. Prayer circles turned into protests. People demanded names, demanded answers. Some whispered about the old Sheriff Gaines, about men from the clan, about the mayor back in '76, a man named Edgar Lawson, who had once been seen arguing with Boone behind the church. Others mentioned a group of men who used to call themselves the Order, Pine Creek's own quiet version of a vigilante white brotherhood. The church, Fimas Zion, which had been boarded up for over a decade, suddenly saw candles burning again on the steps. Sheriff Bell, sitting in his office with the Bible and the old photo laid out in front of him, knew what had to happen next. He had to find Gloria. Gloria Boone hadn't been to Pine Creek in over 20 years. When she answered the phone in her modest apartment in Birmingham, her voice was quiet but steady. She hadn't forgotten where she came from, just learned how to live without it. "Sheriff Bell," she said, "is it really him?" He paused. "We believe it is. We found your father's Bible and his ring." "I'm sorry." There was a silence. Then the sound of soft crying, not hysterical but deep and exhausted, like someone mourning something they'd already mourned once and didn't know how to do again. "I told them," she whispered. "Told them he didn't run. My mama died believing they'd hurt him. No one listened." "We're listening now," Bell said. "We want justice, Miss Boone. For him, for your family." She was quiet again. "Then you better dig deeper. 'Cause I guarantee you it wasn't just one man who put my daddy in that ground." And she was right. Over the next few days, old names began resurfacing. Sheriff Bell compiled a list of men who had influence in 1976, those connected to the church, the town council, law enforcement. Some were dead, but some were still alive. And one of them, a man named Clayton Morris, now 83 and in a nursing home just outside town, had once been deputy under Sheriff Gaines. Bell paid him a visit. Clayton, half senile and bitter, pretended not to remember, but when Bell showed him the Bible, his hands shook. "Where'd you get that?" he asked, voice dry. Bell leaned forward. "Where do you think? From the roots of a tree that grew over your sins." Clayton looked away. "I didn't kill him." "But you know who did," Bell said softly. Clayton's eyes filled with something between guilt and fear. "You ain't gonna find peace digging up them bones, son. Some ghosts don't want to be found." Bell stared him down. "That's too bad. 'Cause I ain't looking for peace. I'm looking for the truth. The truth didn't come easy in Pine Creek. It never had." Sheriff Bell left the nursing home that evening with his fists clenched and heart pounding. Clayton Morris might have been too old to act on fear, but his words had teeth. Some ghosts don't want to be found. That wasn't just a warning. It was a confession wrapped in cowardice. But Bell wasn't the type to back down. He didn't grow up in Pine Creek, but his mother did. And the stories she used to whisper when she thought he was asleep had painted this place clearly. A town that knew how to smile for the camera and slit a throat in the dark. A place where black men like Elijah Boone didn't disappear. They were erased. Back at the station, Bell stared at the wall in front of him, now covered in yellowing clippings, names, and timelines. At the center was a photo of Elijah Boone, smiling wide in a suit. Around him were threads linking him to Sheriff Gaines, the mayor, a few business owners, and a retired judge named Howard Lank. That name came up in a court record Gloria mentioned during their last call. Elijah had tried to file a complaint in '75, something about land being taken from black families without due process. The judge had dismissed it without hearing. That wasn't coincidence. That was corruption. As Bell leaned back in his chair, the front door creaked. He looked up and saw a woman he hadn't expected to see until later that week. Gloria Boone, standing in his station, her face hard, her eyes sunken with years of waiting. "You said justice, Sheriff," she said, her voice low. "I'm here to help you find it." They sat in Bell's office for hours. Gloria brought a box of her own, letters, newspaper scraps, even a cassette tape her mother had once recorded. Her mother had been smart, paranoid even. After Elijah disappeared, she began documenting everything. Who knocked on her door, which cars parked outside the house too long, which white folks suddenly stopped making eye contact. One letter, written by Ruthie in trembling script, was addressed to her daughter. "If you're reading this, baby, then you're old enough to know they were afraid of your daddy, not because he was loud, because he was right. He made them look in the mirror, and they hated what they saw." The tape was harder to listen to. static, occasional crying, and Ruthie's voice, ragged and tired, speaking about the night he vanished. I heard voices outside the window, at least 3 of them. One said, "Get him to the Grove." Another said, "No one will find him there." I stayed quiet, prayed so hard I thought the windows would crack. Then it went quiet. Just gone. Gloria wiped her face after the recording ended. "They took him to the Pine Grove," she whispered, "and they put him in the ground like he was nothing." Belle nodded. Not anymore. A few days later, Belle got a call from a retired state archivist he'd contacted about Sheriff Gaines's personal files. The man had tracked down an old storage facility where the Gaines family kept boxes after his death. Belle drove out there, the same day. The storage unit smelled of mildew and dust. He dug through boxes of old uniforms, hunting gear, and finally, a crate marked 76 Private in faded red paint. Inside were folders, yellowed reports, scribbled notes, and photos. One caught his breath, a black and white photo of a man being dragged across the ground by 2 others. The face was bloodied, but it was unmistakably Pastor Elijah Boone. The other men, one was clearly Sheriff Gaines, the other, hard to tell, but wearing a ring with a noticeable cross and snake emblem. Belle scanned everything, took pictures, bagged it up. Later that night he found that emblem again in one of Ruthie's notes. "The Order uses a ring, snake and cross. They run the whole damn town." The Order. It sounded like something from a bad thriller, but in Pine Creek it was real. A secret club made of men who thought they were chosen to keep things the old way. Belle had heard whispers about them since he moved here. No one ever named names, but everyone knew they weren't just racists. They were puppeteers, pulling strings in the courthouse, the church, the police department. Now he had proof, but he needed a living name, someone who could speak. He called in a man named Otis Weaver, a quiet janitor at City Hall in his 70s, now but once a young deacon at Mount Zion. When Belle asked if he remembered the Order, Otis didn't deny it. "I remember the fear," Otis said, his voice dry. "Every black man in Pine Creek knew not to stay out past dark, and if you made too much noise, you got warned. Pastor Boone got warned a few times." Belle leaned forward. "By who?" Otis hesitated. "Gaines for sure, Mayor Lawson. Maybe a few of the church board members too, but the one you really want, that's Judd Harrow." Belle frowned. "Who's that?" "Used to be the mayor's enforcer. Owned the lumber. Mill, tall, pale, always wore black gloves. They said he dug the holes for the Order's dirty work." Belle sat back, a slow, cold anger rising in his chest. "Is he still alive?" "Last I heard, he's in a cabin out by Lake Ellers. Doesn't come to town, doesn't answer the phone. But if anybody knows what happened that night, it's him." Sheriff Bell didn't wait. The next morning he drove to Lake Ellers, a long, twisting road through thick woods and old memories. The cabin looked like it hadn't been touched in years. Overgrown grass, windows boarded, smoke still curling out of the chimney, though. Bell knocked twice. No answer. Then the door creaked open. Standing there, tall and stiff like an old pine tree, was a man in his 80s with pale blue eyes and weathered hands, Judd Harrow. "You the sheriff?" Harrow asked. Bell nodded. "You? Judd Harrow?" "I was." Bell didn't waste time. "I'm here about Elijah Boone. You were there, weren't you?" The old man's mouth twitched. "Took you long enough." Judd Harrow didn't say much for a long while. He stepped aside and let Sheriff Bell into the cabin without a word. The place smelled like pine and smoke, and something older, like guilt that had been left to rot. The inside of the cabin was dark, lit only by the fire and a single oil lamp. A cross hung above the fireplace, and beside it a dusty photograph of 5 white men in suits, their faces hard and serious. Sheriff Bell recognized 2 of them, Wilford Gaines and Mayor Edgar Lawson. The others were unfamiliar. But Judd. Harrow stood right in the center. "Was this the order?" Bell asked. Harrow didn't answer immediately. He moved slow, sat down in a creaky wooden chair, and stared into the fire. "Say it wasn't supposed to go that far," he muttered. Bell stood still. "So you were there, when they killed him?" Harrow nodded once. I dug the hole. That silence that followed felt endless. Bell kept his voice steady. You're going to tell me everything, right now. Judd exhaled a breath that sounded like it had been held in for 26 years. It started after Boone refused to back down, Harrow said. He'd stirred the town up with all that talk, voting, black ownership, land justice. But what really set the fire off was the letter. Bell frowned. What letter? Boone wrote to the state attorney general about Gaines, about the order, about what they'd done to black farmers, the illegal taxes, the threats, the fake foreclosures. He had copies of deeds that were taken from colored families and handed off to the mayor's cousins. Judd looked Bell dead in the eyes. He was going to expose all of it. He even said it during his sermon 1 week before it happened. Said, "Truth will tear this town's mask off." Well, we weren't ready for that. Bell felt sick. So you decided to murder him? Harrow shook his head slowly. Not me. Gaines did. And Lawson. I just got told to dig the ground by the grove and shut my mouth. But you were there, Bell said, voice tightening. Judd's eyes flickered. Yeah, I was there. He leaned forward and poured himself a shot of something strong. His hand trembled. We met behind the church late that night. Boone had been lured there. Said somebody left a message saying Ruthie had been taken. When he showed up, Gaines and Lawson were waiting. 2 other men too, but I won't say their names. They got kids in this town now. They deserve to be known, Bell snapped. Harrow didn't respond. They told Boone he was a threat to stability, that he'd crossed lines. Boone didn't beg. He didn't cry. You want to know what he said? Bell nodded, jaw clenched. He said, "You can kill me, but my voice will haunt these trees." Then he spit in Gaines's face. A silence followed. Then Harrow spoke. Lower. That's when they started beating him with a shovel, not a gun, not a knife and a damn shovel. Cracked his ribs, busted his mouth. I heard him praying even while they hit him. Then they dragged him to the hole I dug. Bell turned away, his fists trembling. They didn't even bury him deep, Harrow said, his voice cracking for the first time. Just enough so the ground looked flat, no marker, no stone, just dirt and silence. Bell stared into the fire, his own voice a whisper. You helped them. Harrow nodded. I did. Then why talk now? Judd let the silence stretch before answering. Because I hear him sometimes, in my dreams, in the wind through those trees. And now you all found the box, that means he's coming back, don't it? Bell didn't answer. He stood slowly and took a long breath. You're going to write a statement. Then you're coming back with me to the station. But Judd just shook his head. No, I ain't. I won't leave this cabin again. You want a statement? I'll give you one. But I've already been judged. Bell narrowed his eyes. You think confessing makes you a good man now? Judd looked back with those tired, pale eyes. No, Sheriff. I don't think I've been good in 40 years. Back at the station, Bell played the recorder. He listened to Judd's full confession, every word of it. The shovel, the grove, the other names he refused to say. It wasn't enough. Not for a full case, not for arrests, but it was something. And it was all Gloria needed to hear. When she came to the station that night, she stood across from the sheriff, tears in her eyes and her mother's cross in her hand. He prayed while they killed him? She asked, voice trembling. Bell nodded. She stared down, lips pressed, sat tight. Then he won. They couldn't take his voice. But the town didn't react the same way. When word got out that Judd Harrow had confessed, the reaction was mixed. Black families wept and hugged and stood on the steps of Mount Zion and sang songs of justice and mourning. Candles were lit. Flowers were placed beneath the stump. But others, mostly white, mostly old, looked away. Some still defended Sheriff Gaines, said Judd was senile, claimed the sheriff had done what he had to do to keep peace. One anonymous letter sent to the sheriff's office read, Boone brought it on himself. You dig too deep, you wake things that should stay buried. Bell read it, folded it neatly, and slid it into Elijah's Bible. He wasn't surprised. Evil didn't always scream. Sometimes it whispered behind curtains. But Sheriff Bell wasn't finished. He brought the confession to the DA. He contacted the state investigators, and he tracked down the children of the other two men Judd wouldn't name. When confronted, both men denied everything, but Bell saw the fear behind their eyes. The investigation stayed open, and for the first time in Pine Creek's history, the name Elijah Boone was spoken in court as a victim. Weeks later, Gloria stood in front of her father's final resting place, the bones reburied beneath a tall pine tree on Matt Zion's land, marked now by a black stone carved with gold letters, Rev. Elijah J. Boone, 1938-1976. Let justice roll down like waters, and righteousness like a mighty stream. She stood there for a long time. Then she whispered, "They didn't break you, Daddy." The wind moved gently through the trees. The death threats started coming in quiet. No flaming crosses, no mobs, just letters, typed, unsigned, slid. Under the station door in the dead of night, some were short and sharp. "Stop digging." Others were filled with racial slurs and phrases like, "You ain't from here," or "Pine Creek takes care of its own." Sheriff Reuben Bell read each one carefully, never flinching. He kept them all, stored neatly in a box labeled Cowards, right next to Pastor Boone's Bible. He refused to let fear run the show, but it was clear, the deeper he went, the more the town pushed back. It wasn't just the old guard. Now, younger faces, men who weren't even born when Boone died, started acting strange. Cold stares at the grocery store, engine revs when Bell walked to his car. Even a dead crow left on the steps of the sheriff's department one morning, its wings spread wide like a warning. Inside the station, the tension was rising too. One of Bell's own deputies, Clyde Warner, had started avoiding him altogether. Quiet guy, late 40s, local born and raised. Bell noticed the way he paused when the Boone case came up, how he'd suddenly excuse himself when the DA sent over more files. Bell called him into the office one morning. "You got something to say?" "Clyde?" he asked, straight to the point. Clyde rubbed the back of his neck, looked down. "This thing, it's stirring up ghosts, Sheriff. Bad ones. Folks are on edge." "Good," Bell replied. "Maybe they'll finally feel what it's like to live in fear." Clyde didn't answer, just nodded once and left. Bell sat back in his chair. His gut told him Clyde knew more than he was letting on. Maybe about the order, maybe about who else was involved in Boone's death. But prying it out of him would take time and trust, which was wearing thin. Meanwhile, Gloria Boone wasn't sitting still. She'd become a symbol in town, not just of her father's memory, but of resilience. She spoke softly at church vigils, appeared in interviews, and even met with the state investigators when they visited. But underneath the calm exterior, a fire burned. She wanted names, not half-truths, not half-dead confessions. She wanted full justice. "You're not just fighting men, Sheriff," she told Bell one afternoon. "You're fighting a belief, the kind that's passed down like a family Bible." Bell nodded. "Then we burn the whole book." Then something unexpected happened. An envelope arrived at the station. No return address. Inside was a photograph, a grainy image from the late 70s, 5 men in white robes, faces obscured, standing in the grove near Mount Zion. But one face, barely visible beneath a slipped hood, was unmistakable. Deputy Clyde Warner. Bell stared at it for a long time, heart sinking. He'd suspected, but seeing it was something else. Clyde would have been in his early 20s then, a rookie cop, probably recruited by Gaines, probably scared out of his mind and too deep before he even knew it. Bell called him in that night. The conversation was quiet. No shouting, no accusations, just the truth between two men, one trying to bury it, the other trying to exhume it. "You were there," Bell said, laying the photo down. "Maybe not when Boone died, but you were part of the order." Clyde stared at the photo, expression unreadable. Then he sat down. "I didn't hurt him," he said finally. "I swear to God, I was young. I didn't know what I was stepping into." "Why stay?" Bell asked. "Why never speak?" Clyde looked up, eyes glassy. "Because everyone I knew was part of it, my daddy, my uncles, my preacher. If I'd said anything, they'd have put me in the ground too." Bell leaned forward. "Then do the right thing now. Tell me who else was there." Clyde hesitated. Then slowly he began to speak. The names spilled. Out like poison. Howard Lank, the judge. Preacher Doran from the Old White Baptist Church. Earl McKissick, former town treasurer. Marvin Twill, who ran the funeral home and made sure Elijah Boone's death certificate was never filed. Each name a familiar thread in Pine Creek's fabric. Men still respected, still quoted in sermons, still toasted in town hall. Clyde also confirmed something even more chilling. The box under the stump hadn't been buried by Boone. It was placed there by Ruthie, he said. I overheard it in '78. She told someone she left something where the roots could tell the truth. And that explained the Bible, the note, the photo. She knew they killed him, Clyde said. She just couldn't say it out loud. So she buried her pain and hoped one day someone would dig it up. Bell sat in silence. The truth had always been in the ground. Now he had the final pieces, enough to drag this into the public, to force an official reckoning. But it came, at a cost. That night his tires were slashed. The next day someone spray-painted traitor on the station wall. He didn't flinch. He just got up earlier, stood taller. He held a press conference on the church steps of Mount Zion, the same steps Elijah Boone had once preached from. The entire town showed up, and Bell didn't hold back. He named names, shared parts of the confession, spoke the truth clearly, cleanly, without fear. These men did not just kill Pastor Boone, he said. They buried our town's soul. And we are here to dig it back up piece by piece. Some clapped, some turned away, but Gloria stood behind him, hand on his shoulder, and when the cameras turned off, a boy no older than 10 walked up, placed a wildflower at the base of the steps and whispered, "My grandma said Pastor Boone used to tell stories like they were magic." Bell smiled. "Then let's give him an ending that's worthy." 2 days after the press conference, the tape arrived. It came in a plain yellow envelope with no return address, just the words, "Play Me," written in red marker across the front. Sheriff Bell had learned by now that nothing in Pine Creek was ever delivered without meaning. Every whisper, every warning, every package. It all came wrapped in secrets and soaked in threat. He took the envelope into his office, locked the door and slid the cassette into a dusty old player someone had left in evidence years ago. The tape clicked, then hissed, and then a voice. Male, calm, cold. "Sheriff Bell," it began, "you think you're hunting men, but you're hunting ghosts. We've been here longer than you, longer than Elijah Boone, longer than justice." Bell leaned forward. "What was done in '76 was done to protect order, to protect Pine Creek. You're not here to clean up a mess. You're here to light a fire. And you better pray it don't burn you next." There was a pause. Then the voice added almost softly, "Check the baptism records. August 1969. The name you're looking for has been with you the whole time." The tape clicked off. Bell sat frozen for a moment. The baptism records. He jumped up, yanked open his file drawer, and pulled out the old church registry he'd collected from Mount Zion after Gloria reopened it. Flipping through the brittle pages, he scanned name after name. August 1969. There it was. Baptized Elijah Boone, Jr. His breath stopped. Next to the name, a note scrawled in faded ink. Born of Elijah and Ruthie, adopted at 3 months. And, beneath it stamped in red, confidential, transferred custody, sealed per church order. He flipped the page, stunned. Ruthie had a second child, a son, and someone had buried that fact, just like they buried the father. He called Gloria immediately. She picked up on the second ring, her voice hoarse. "Sheriff, did your mother ever mention a brother?" Bell asked. Silence. Then, "No, never." Bell hesitated. "There's a record. Baptism. August. 69, a son, says adopted. Church sealed the file. Gloria paused, then sighed. She must have hidden it. Maybe to protect him. After what they did to Daddy." Bell leaned back in his chair. "I think someone's trying to tell us he's still here." The next few days were a blur of research and interviews. Bell pulled every old record he could find, hospital logs, adoption papers, census files. Most had been scrubbed or redacted, but then, from an old nurse who once worked at Pine Creek Medical, came a single, quiet tip. "I remember Ruthie coming." In with a baby boy, the nurse said. Dark eyes, real quiet. They said he was going to a church couple, private placement. Which church? Belle asked. She hesitated, then whispered, First Pine Baptist. Belle blinked. That was the same church where one of the order's oldest members, Preacher Doran, had led services for over 40 years. He drove straight there. The church was still in use, though smaller now. The new preacher was young and soft-spoken. But in the basement, Belle found the archives, dusty, mold-smelling, and packed in boxes. In a file marked Adoptions, 1969, he found a document. Elijah Boone, Jr., legally adopted by Marcus and Edith Calloway. New name, Christopher Calloway. The name slapped him in the face. Chris Calloway. He was a city councilman, born and raised in Pine Creek, had worked alongside Belle on community reform, had even stood beside him during the press conference last week. Belle had known him for years and never knew. Chris Calloway was Pastor Elijah Boone's son, raised in the very town that had murdered his father, adopted by a white couple tied to the same church that tried to bury the truth. How much did he know? Belle didn't waste time. He drove to Chris's office, heart pounding. Chris was there, alone, reading papers, his eyes tired. When Belle walked in and dropped the document on the desk, Chris stared at it for a long while, then looked up. So, it's true, he said softly. You knew? Belle asked. Chris nodded once. Not everything. I knew I was adopted. Knew the whispers around town, but I didn't know about Elijah Boone until 5 years ago. Belle blinked. How? Chris pulled open a drawer and handed Belle a photo. It was of Ruthie, holding a baby. And standing behind her, blurry but visible, was a younger Elijah Boone. My mother left it for me, in a sealed envelope when she died. Said it was time I knew where I came from. Belle's voice was hoarse. Why didn't you say anything? Chris looked up, eyes filled with something broken. Because I was terrified. Everything I've built, my name, my job, my position, it's all on land they gave me. Land soaked in blood. If I said I was Boone's son, they'd destroy me. Belle stared at him, barely breathing. But now you know, Chris added, and you get to choose what to do with it. Belle leaned in close. You think your father died so his son could live safe in silence? He died so someone could finish what he started. Chris closed his eyes. I'm tired of hiding, he said. A week later, Chris Calloway stood on the church steps of Mount Zion, the same place his father had once preached, flanked by Sheriff Belle and Gloria Boone. He stepped to the microphone and cleared his throat. My name is Christopher Elijah Boone Calloway, he said, and I am the son of a man who was murdered for telling the truth. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some clapped, others looked away. But Chris didn't stop. My father's blood is in this soil. My mother's tears still live in these trees, and I will no longer be silent about what this town did to them. His voice rose. We are not here to ask forgiveness. We are here to demand that truth has its day. Belle stood behind him, jaw tight. Gloria wept silently, and in that moment, Pine Creek felt different, lighter, heavier, honest. Like the trees had finally been allowed to speak. They thought the worst was behind them. After Chris Calloway's shocking reveal on the church steps, Pine Creek had changed overnight. At least, it looked that way on the surface. State investigators flooded into town within days, combing through the sheriff's files, the taped confession, and the church archives. Gloria Boone was asked to testify. So was Clyde Warner. Even Judd Harrow from his cabin was visited by agents, though he'd grown weaker by the week and refused to leave his porch. Every newspaper in Alabama was talking about it. Son of slain black pastor breaks silence, town under state probe. TV vans circled Mount Zion like vultures, and reporters begged for interviews. For the first time in half a century, Pine Creek couldn't hide. But that kind of light draws shadows too. It happened 3 days after the investigation began. A Molotov cocktail was hurled through the stained glass window of Mount Zion in the middle of the night. The fire spread fast. The old wood caught like dry paper. By the time fire trucks got there, half the building was gone. The roof had collapsed. The cross on the steeple had blackened and fallen into the graveyard. Belle arrived on the scene in record time. Gloria was already there, standing in the mud in her slippers, eyes red, face blank. "This was personal," she said, staring at the flames. "This wasn't a warning. It was revenge." Belle clenched his fists, his voice low. "And it won't be ignored." The firefighters confirmed what Belle already suspected. It was arson. There was no doubt, but no one had seen anything. No security footage, no witnesses, just fire. And silence. That morning, Belle found another envelope on his desk. Inside was a photo. It showed the burned church. On the back, written in the same red marker as the tape, "If you don't stop, we'll bury another Boone under a tree." Belle's blood turned to ice. He increased patrols around Gloria's house immediately, stationed 2 officers outside her door. For the first time, she didn't argue. She just nodded and went back to her father's scorched Bible, trying to clean the soot from its cover. That same day, a package arrived for Gloria. No stamp, no label. Just left on her porch, like a ghost's gift. Inside, wrapped in an old kitchen towel, was a handwritten letter. The handwriting was familiar, faded, precise. It was her mother's. July 1977. My sweet Gloria, if you're reading this, it means someone finally found your daddy's truth, and that means they'll come for you too, like they came for him. I wanted to tell you everything when you were young, but I needed you to have a life before you carried this weight. So here it is, my truth. You had a brother. His name was Elijah Jr., and I gave him away to save his life. They had already taken your father. They threatened to take you next, said they'd burn our house down with you in it if I spoke a word. I ran to a church I didn't trust, begged them to find a family that would protect him. It was the only way I could keep him alive. I've prayed every night that he was safe, that he was loved, that one day he'd find his way back to you. If he does, tell him his father was a lion, and his mother loved him enough to break her own heart. I'm sorry, but I'm not ashamed. Truth must win, even if it takes a lifetime. Love. Mama Gloria sat on her porch for hours after reading it. The sun came and went, but she didn't move. When Belle arrived, she handed him the letter. He read it carefully, then looked at her. "She did what she had to do," he said. Gloria nodded. "I hated her for the silence, but now I understand. She lived with this pain every day, buried it under her skin, and now it's our turn to carry it." Belle leaned against the railing beside her. "You're not alone." "No," she whispered. "None of us are anymore." The fire at Mount Zion became a rallying cry. Black families from all over the region drove into Pine Creek. They stood in front of the ashes and sang hymns. Chris Calloway stood before them and pledged that the church would be rebuilt, bigger, stronger, with his own hands if he had to. Donations poured in, but the threats didn't stop. Another letter came, this one slipped under Belle's windshield. "You'll never prove who lit the match, and we're still watching." But they had made a mistake, because fear only works when people are alone. And Pine Creek wasn't alone anymore. Then came the break Belle had been waiting for. An anonymous tip, voice scrambled through a modulator, came into the station. "You want the arsonist? Check the records on David Laurie. Gas station attendant, was seen buying 3 bottles of Everclear the night of the fire. His uncle? One of the last living order members. Start there." Belle didn't hesitate. He picked Laurie up the same day. At first the kid denied everything, sweaty, twitchy, full of attitude, but when shown a printout of the tip and the receipt for the Everclear, his story cracked. "I was just told to do it," he blurted. "I didn't even know who the guy was. Some old man in a black car gave me cash and said to make it look like the devil got in." Belle narrowed his eyes. "What was his name?" "I don't know. He just called himself Mr. Pine. Swore my uncle would be proud of me. Said it was for the old ways." "Did he say anything else?" Laurie looked down. "He said, if I didn't do it, they'd come for me too." Belle's hands trembled. The order wasn't dead. It had gone underground, infecting a new generation. Sheriff Reuben Bell stood in front of a black car parked at the edge of the Pine Creek Cemetery. The grass crunched under his boots as he approached, wind whispering through the trees. Those same trees that had swallowed Pastor Elijah Boone once upon a time. The man inside the car didn't flinch. He was in his 70s, clean-shaven, wearing a tailored black coat despite the heat. His hands rested on a polished cane, one ring gleaming, a cross coiled with a snake, the order's mark. "You must be Mr. Pine," Bell said. The old man smiled faintly. "I go by many names." "You've been busy, Sheriff." Bell didn't smile back. "You had the church burned. You threatened Gloria. You've been pulling strings from the shadows." The man looked up at the sky, unbothered. "You brought rot into the open. What did you think would happen?" "I thought maybe the town had changed," Bell said coldly. "I was wrong, but I'm here to end this. For good." Mr. Pine leaned forward, eyes sharp. "You think justice comes by dragging bones into the sun? Men like Boone, they died because they threatened the design. He wanted to shift the balance. And now you've stirred up ghosts." Bell's jaw tightened. "You're right, I stirred them, but they're not the ones being haunted. You are." From his coat, Bell pulled out a recorder. Mr. Pine's smile twitched. "We have your voice on tape. We have the boy who lit the match. We have names. You're not untouchable anymore." The old man chuckled softly. "What will you do, Sheriff? Drag an old man in cuffs across the courthouse steps? Let the world see the monster in the mirror?" "I won't have to," Bell said, "because you're going to sign a confession." Mr. Pine's eyes burned with quiet rage. Then he said something Bell hadn't expected. "You don't know the full truth. Boone didn't just want change, he was organizing, in secret. Black farmers, field workers, union leaders. He was going to march them straight to the Capitol." "So?" Bell asked. "So," Pine hissed. "He wasn't just a preacher, he was a threat to order." Bell shook his head. "You mean he was a threat to your order?" And with that he stepped back as agents emerged from the woods. Mr. Pine sat still as they placed handcuffs on him, the cane slipping from his lap and hitting the grass with a dull thud. He didn't fight. He didn't yell. He just stared at Bell and said, "This town will eat itself alive, you'll see." The arrest made national news. For the first time, a living leader of a white supremacist network tied to historical murders and political suppression was exposed, not by federal agents, but by a local sheriff, a forgotten daughter, and a son raised in silence. The state of Alabama launched a commission. Former town officials were subpoenaed. Clyde Warner testified under oath. The Callaways' adoption paperwork was unsealed, and the government officially acknowledged what Pine Creek had denied for decades, that Pastor Elijah Boone had been assassinated, that law enforcement had covered it up, and that the town had profited from the silence. The truth, once buried under tree roots, now blazed like fire across the nation. But even in justice, there is grief. Gloria Boone stood inside the new mat, Zion Chapel, now rebuilt with the help of hundreds, white and black alike. The walls were fresh, but the pulpit was the original, pulled from the ash and cleaned by hand. Behind it hung a photo of her father, smiling in his suit. She took the stage as the choir fell silent. "My father didn't die for power," she said. "He didn't die to start a war. He died because he believed in a truth bigger than fear. And because of that, his voice still lives." She turned slightly. "My brother Chris stands beside me, and now we lead together, not in anger but in memory." The crowd stood and clapped. Some wept. And in that moment, for the first time, the church felt full again. Chris Calloway returned to the city council, not as a quiet reformer, but as a man unafraid of his legacy. He changed his name publicly, Christopher Elijah Boone Calloway. He passed a resolution to recognize Elijah Boone Day every July 14th, the day he disappeared. Statues were proposed, books were written, but most importantly, children in Pine Creek began learning the truth in school. Not the cleaned-up version, the real story, about the preacher who stood too tall, about the mother who loved in silence, about the daughter who waited, and about the truth that wouldn't stay buried. On the edge of town, under the tree stump, where it all began, a new plaque was placed. Here lay the roots of a truth that could not be silenced. In memory of Reverend Elijah J. Boone, 1938-1976. Beneath it were carved the final words from his hidden letter, "Pray they find me." They had, and now the whole world knew,